Wait is the Disaster Behavior Health Coordinator at the Department of Behavioral Health and Development of Services. We also have Kristen Tully, who will be working the chat box, this is me for this afternoon, answering your questions. She is the Deputy Director, Crisis Counseling Program, also at the Department of Behavioral Health and Development of Services. And I also have one of my colleagues, James Slater, who will be helping to assist in the tech issues that we may have. And for those who don't know, my name is Adrenia Tolliver. I am one of the training coordinators at the Office of Emergency Preparedness at Virginia Department of Health. So now I will turn the presentation over to Stephanie. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrenia. I'm going to go ahead and get started on my end. Thank you for the introduction. Again, I'm Stephanie Waite. I'm the Disaster Behavioral Health Coordinator with the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services. We work in the Office of Emergency Management. We work in that division at GBHDS. Kristen Tully, who is here with me, she is the Deputy Program Director of our VA COPES program. That's been our disaster behavioral health response to COVID-19 that we put together over the spring and summer. And so I've been working very closely with her. So I asked her to help me with subject matter expertise in our chat box today. So I want to thank everybody that is signed up. I know everybody is really, really busy right now. Just to let you know about the presentation, I try to give presentations and present it in such a way that's relatable and not too much on the technical side. We are going to talk about some technical pieces, but I like to present it in such a way that it becomes operational for you even day to day. Another thing is, in looking at the list of attendees, it looks like we have a variety of different professions here. Not everybody's healthcare, not everybody's fire EMS. We have social workers. We have folks from the Department of Emergency Management, state and local health departments. So throughout the presentation, I refer to you all as first responders. So please know that when I say that, I am including all of those that are not necessarily healthcare workers. When I say first responders, in my mind, I'm thinking of, those of us that interface with the public, provide public services, human services, and we continue to provide those throughout the pandemic. So just wanted to clarify that. Don't think that it doesn't pertain to you. And I feel like I put this together in such a way that everybody will find it useful. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about our objectives. Next slide. So just briefly, we will learn about the different types of stress caused by providing care to other people during the pandemic. We are going to really simplify stress, and you'll see what I mean in just a moment, but we are going to build upon a definition of stress as it applies to you, not so much technically or scientifically, so to speak. We'll talk about how stress affects first responders and your family members and colleagues and the like. We'll talk about the difference between burnout and compassion fatigue. Now, those are, yes, technical terms, also referred to as secondary trauma or vicarious trauma. But we are going to sort of go through the differences. I think this will really help you understand how your role in providing care to other people within your organization, how you may be affected by stress. And it's also helpful for managers and supervisors to be aware of that too, because when we go on and talk about next steps moving forward and good coping strategies, understanding that relationship will be really important. So that's what we are going to distinguish there. And having said that, we will, of course, identify current self-care and develop coping strategies. I realize a lot of you are, mid-level, upper-level professionals, and we've all been living in our bodies since the day we had it. We know ourselves. I consider myself a person who's learned a great deal from direct service that I did when I started my career. So I guess my sort of anchor for myself here is having had experience with understanding wellness when working with the general population. I was in the criminal justice population prior to emergency management. So I worked with in jails and prisons as a counselor, and I also worked in a domestic violence shelter. I learned a lot from that experience. I thought I would learn and try to figure out what makes people tick, right out of college. That's what I wanted to know, but it turned out I learned a lot more about myself, and it was sort of a journey. And obviously I'm not doing direct service anymore, but I'm still working with similar programs. So we will just sort of talk about where we can pivot and look forward. So that's just a little bit of reference. I'll be using, since this is virtual and we have the chat feature, we're going to have Q&A at the end, but since we can't really talk back and forth, I'll be referring to some of my experiences prior in those direct service positions and how I've responded to COVID-19. Next slide. So briefly, before we go into definitions, before we even dabble into things too technical, the most important thing before we start anything is that today it is my hope that you all understand the difference between stress, burnout, and compassion fatigue, yes, but it's not as important as just simply understanding that we all operate on a continuum of stress every day. And we move back and forth along that continuum every day, sometimes throughout the day. And that is completely normal. The important thing, the message I really want to get across is that self-care starts with self-awareness. And so understanding where we are, being aware of where we are on that continuum and how it may be affecting our ability to work with our colleagues and, to interact with the outside world. So that's what I feel is the most important, and that's how we're going to sort of discuss it from here on. So we're going to build upon that severity scale that I'll show you here in a second. We are going to build upon that, but the most important thing is that we learn to acknowledge where we are, be able to anticipate stress in our lives so that we can mitigate how it affects our lives rather than aggravate. Yes, I made that up just for this. Next slide. So for those of us that like visuals, and I think visuals are fairly simple, this is a stress continuum model. This is a foundational part of the stress first aid model. And if you don't know what that is, I am going to talk a little bit more about it at the end, but the stress first aid model is a nationally recognized best practice. And it was developed as a way to assess both your individual level of stress and that of your colleagues and peers or family members, and understand that everybody will react differently when faced with different severities of stress. You'd be really surprised at the things that you just assume everybody gets stressed out. Some people don't. Some things don't bother some people, and I've always found that really interesting. But a person's reactions, you can see, here on the left is green, which is pretty much steady state. Things are copacetic, all the way up to red. And when we get to the red part, is certainly at a place where we need some sort of intervention. And we're going to discuss that. But this is a place where people really should not be continuing to interface with the public. And so you can see how the severity goes up. You see where there are symptoms. This just might be helpful for people who are not accustomed to putting an adjective or a name or even talking out loud about what it is they're experiencing and what it is that they're feeling. And so that's another reason I thought that this continuum was very helpful. And the most important thing about this is not, learning everything that's on it. It's just sort of being able to recognize where you are. So that's why I decided to go that way instead of more definitions. Okay, next slide. So in a lot of these wellness and self-care trainings, we always talk about symptoms. And that's great. I came up with a list of symptoms that I wanted to share with you, some of which I have only recently experienced. And I will tell you, I am a person that operates on a fairly high level of anxiety most of the time. It's a lot of work for me to totally be in that green steady state, but I'm aware of it. And so I do have a lot of measures that I take to control that, so to speak. But some of these symptoms I added simply because they are new to me. So even the most aware person or individual can certainly find that COVID has pushed all of us to our boundaries in one degree or another. So what we are going to do, we can pull up the poll now. And so what we'll do here is, here are a lot of symptoms, and if you could just take a second and choose your top three. Choose the top three symptoms there that you most readily relate to. And there should be a poll up on your screen. Adrena, are you showing any, or does it just do it at the end?
Yes, it's running. We have a minute left.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So again, what we're going to do is we're going to review, after we do the poll, we're going to review some of the symptoms that come about when we're experiencing more stress than usual. We're not going to go into a ton of detail about the ones that I'm sure you've all heard about and have read about time and time again. But we're going to talk about how these may most definitely relate to the work that you've been doing since the pandemic started.
Okay, closing the poll.
Looks like there's some people on the phone, maybe they're not seeing it. If that's the case, that's fine. I'm still prepared to go over them, so. Okay, we can go to the next slide, 6, showing all of the symptoms.
Okay. The poll's results are showing now.
Oh, okay. I guess it's one of those things where it only does it at the end, unlike the other platform. I'll go back and look. Okay. changes in sleep, short-tempered, difficult to concentrate. Okay. So it looks like the highest one was feeling short-tempered, seconded by diet changes, and then a toss-up between changes in sleep and difficulty concentrating. It makes perfect sense. Okay, well, let's talk about some of these. Adrena, do you have all the symptoms pulled up?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so let's talk about some of these. Again, some of these are things I know you've all have heard probably many times before, so we won't spend too much time on them. So the first one was sleep, and this is the biggest one. It's the one change in our body that most people can identify as an indicator of stress going on in their lives. So obviously people can want to sleep too much, feel that they can't sleep at all, they can't get to sleep, can't stay asleep, and the next one, feeling short-tempered, certainly as a result of not having enough sleep, we tend to feel short-tempered. And one of the things that we're going to talk about as we discuss coping mechanisms and who we can go to really support us in working through these things, feeling short-tempered is something that we may not recognize in ourselves. So just be aware that some of these, we have to be open to understanding that people that really care about us, people that really know us, people that we trust may come to us and say, I have noticed that. So again, like what I mentioned in the very beginning, it's just about creating more self-awareness and being open to the reality that we may not have it all figured out the way we think we do. So that's feeling short-tempered. Changes in diet. Certainly, some of you have been in a healthcare role or roles that over the last several months, you've had to work longer hours. You've been away from home longer, and it's been a go, go, go kind of that post-disaster, right? And generally when disaster responders are sort of in the moment doing the work, they don't have time to have square meals. And the first thing we tend to grab are prepackaged things that are high in sugar and high in carbs. Also, those things give us a little bump so that we can keep going. Our body doesn't do a whole lot in the moment to stop us from doing that, because when we are in that sort of heightened state of adrenaline and stress, our brain tells our stomach, you don't need to eat. You don't need to do a lot of things right now. And so you go, go, go. But know that what goes up must come down, as I'm sure you're all aware. In that a couple of hours after you've maybe only had 2 honey buns, me personally, I know I'm going to be exhausted. If I have a pancake breakfast, I know I am going to need to take a nap by 2 o'clock that day. I don't know, it's just the way it is. So keep that in mind, though, understand, no judgment. It's difficult. Difficulty concentrating. We certainly all have those days where the words just will not come to us, the right words. It's very difficult doing work that's multi-layered or requires a lot of analysis on our part. That's totally fine. And we all have those days, and maybe they do happen a little bit more. But consider, say, post-disaster, 6 months down the road, things are the new normal as they can be, and you're still finding it very difficult to concentrate. That's something to sort of keep in mind. And again, this may be something that somebody else brings to your attention. Dental problems. This is one of the new ones for me. And I figured it out. I just didn't recognize it as being an indicator of stress. I went to the dentist this summer for having 2 different fillings pop out, and I thought it was just shoddy dental work, to be honest. But when I went in and he fixed them, he indicated that I also had a couple of loose teeth. Therefore, there's bone loss. And I've always worn a night guard because I know I grind at night. And he said to me, a lot of people have been coming in this spring and summer with really similar issues. And we've been making a lot of day guards. So he made me a day guard. This is what it looks like. Okay. I don't wear it when I'm speaking professionally. It's not easy to do. But basically, people are clenching all the time throughout the day. I did not realize that I was doing it. So hopefully wearing that will save me some money on dental bills and keep the cavities in my mouth and, not have teeth fall out. Increased use of drugs or alcohol. A lot of people, it is with, it's custom for them to come home from work at the end of the day with dinner to have a glass of wine. Some people already have to take medication to help them sleep. That's just part of their normal life. But if you're finding that it's more difficult to get to sleep with your prescribed dose and you're having to up it, and then the next morning you feel groggy. Same thing with alcohol. Doesn't mean you're an addict or becoming an addict, but you're having a little bit more difficult time getting the medication to do what it's supposed to do. And as a result, it's interfering with your ability to work. It's interfering with your ability to communicate with people. So that's something to keep in mind. For self-care, when everything first went on lockdown, everybody joked on social media, yeah, we're still in our pajamas. The kids are still in their pajamas all day, and I think that's okay. I think there are exceptions to be made. It's with the extenuating circumstances. However, again, people you trust in your life, if you are approached because there is a body odor or things like that, if you're always in your pajamas and essentially you're not taking care of yourself. Now that doesn't mean, the way that I look right now, I don't put makeup on and do my hair every day. I really don't. I don't go to the office for the time being, and so I haven't done that. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not taking care of myself. I still have found ways to sort of develop a schedule with the new norm here where I get up and get dressed and, do all those things that I would usually do to go to work. So something else to keep in mind, physical symptoms such as tightness in the chest, increased heart rate, upset stomach. We all know that the brain to belly relationship very much exists. And again, this is one of those things, we knew it existed before this. So tightness in the chest and increased heart rate. In the last training that we did, I saw a lot of people didn't indicate that one, but I will share with you that this is something new to me. I have had asthma my entire life. It's very well controlled, but I was finding myself feeling like I couldn't get in deep breaths. So I started using my inhaler, my rescue inhaler, and I thought, this isn't working. And then at night, I couldn't go to sleep. My heart was racing. I thought it was because of the inhaler. So I finally called my primary care doctor and talked to her about it. And she said, you're having little panic attacks. I thought, really? I thought panic attacks were these major episodes, and I've never had them before. So with that information, I actually stepped up some of the coping practices that I had been doing previous to COVID. I had to step it up. And eventually, as my workflow sort of smoothed out into August, September, things change, things have changed. Things feel a little bit more new normal. Next slide. All right, so we've talked about some symptoms. We have our baseline. We understand sort of that there is a spectrum of stress. We're all on it. And we can all sort of go back and forth. Now let's talk about a little bit more about those definitions and how it may coincide with the work that the additional work that you've been doing during the pandemic. We're going to talk about compassion fatigue and burnout. And I just want to be able to show you some of the things that you may be able to do to sort of catch yourself and realizing that something you're doing, thinking, or some behaviors may actually be a sign of stress other than something else, and be able to take care of yourself, and the organization can assist you with that as well. So next slide, and we will start our first definition, which we've pretty much already gone over. So it's anytime a circumstance, an event, person causes us negative thoughts, feelings, this is generally referred to as stress. One of the reasons why we all respond to stress differently, it's also about values. And again, the things that really stress me out, these are things you may not give a second thought about. And it just depends on what it is. So for supervisors and managers, having said that, stress is relative. So keep that in mind. A lot of us in this field are in this sort of, you do the work until it's done. You keep going, you know, our managers, they keep going, and sometimes I don't know how they do it. But we need to understand that while that may not create additional stress for you, it may for other people. So as we go through the definitions, I will sort of take you through an example with COVID-related stress for myself, as I have been here and there. Mid-March, I stopped everything that I was doing, and I immediately had to set up a program that was available to all citizens that was a behavioral health response to the pandemic. So, and this needed to be done very, very quickly. I had to hire staff. There were new administrative duties that I had to do that I had never done before. And if you work for a government agency, you understand when I say I had to start doing things in procurement, you'll understand how very stressful that can be. And on top of that, I had to, we, did a lot of operational stuff in response to the pandemic for the general public and those in our hospitals, our licensed professionals. The reaches of our organization are just, huge. So this was sort of the baseline of what COVID brought me. These are the things I have to do, and I have to do them very quickly. And a lot of things I don't know how to do. And again, generally speaking, over time, with brain development and maturity, we learn how to cope with stress. We know how to anticipate stress so that it can be mitigated. One of the ways that I was able to mitigate the stress was that my supervisor either taught me or gave me a warm handoff to the people in my agency that could help me with procurement. And he introduced them to the work that I was doing, what my task was, so that they would understand. And so he provided that warm handoff. And so I didn't feel like I was just sort of left out there to figure it out, which is typical in emergency management. You create and make the plane while you're flying it. But it just sort of mitigated the stress for me. Next slide. So compassion fatigue. This is emotional and physical exhaustion characterized by diminished capacity to feel empathy for others. And it's also known as secondary trauma. Again, that's kind of why I don't get into a lot of definitions, because people that are really clinical, by clinical, I mean most behavioral health professionals, people can argue all day about the difference between compassion fatigue and secondary trauma. But in this context, what I am saying to you is that when we have an extended period of time of taking care of other people and doing so in a way that we are not accustomed to, while you may have your own fears, especially in the beginning when so much is unknown, it becomes difficult to continue to provide that level of care and support. Healthcare professionals are certainly trained in bedside manner, right? But I don't know to this degree where some healthcare professionals are the last person with a family's loved one when they are passing away, and they are trying to help people cope with so much grief and loss. It's different. You know, like I said, COVID and all the circumstances of the ways our job changed really pushes us to our boundaries of what we are able to do. And like I said, most healthcare professionals, people that interact with the public, social workers, fire, EMS, even the health department, emergency management, certainly we are, taught how to interface, but, a lot of this is just a part of professional maturity. But at this level, where the public is angry, we've learned that, they are scared, they are sad, they are uncertain. So being able to manage all of that with this intensity and this often is certainly pushing people to their boundaries, and essentially it wears people out. But again, we're going to talk about ways that we can sort of circumvent that, both as an individual and as part of an organization. Next slide, please. Burnout. So burnout is that part of the spectrum at the very end. It is the red. This is where we do not want to be. Again, this person should not be interacting with the public. They shouldn't be providing services to folks because they are really not well. This is a state of mental and physical exhaustion caused by prolonged stress. People feel hopeless. They feel like no matter what they do, it's not going to make a difference. And these are people that it's not that they're bad at their jobs. They love their jobs. They know how to do their jobs, but they start to feel numb. And a lot of the reason for burnout, the distinction there is that burnout refers to the circumstances within your work, your everyday work, that have changed in such a way that it makes your job more difficult to do. So as a result of COVID, perhaps the issue with PPE, like we had at the beginning, and whether or not you have it, you don't, again, interfacing with the public, with people not really knowing how easy things are to contract, is a lot of stress. And, it also relates to the organization, right? Because you go to work, this is how I need to do my job now. Well, this is what I need to do it. So a lot of professionals, I always say, I feel it's more likely service professionals, because that's the only work I've ever done, but that's probably not the case. Feel that there are policies and practices in place that just make their job so much more tedious than it needs to be, to the point where they really don't enjoy doing it. Nothing really makes them happy anymore. They're not interested in the things they used to be interested in. Certainly, you can imagine how this can affect people's home life. And so a lot of people end up leaving a job or sometimes a profession because of burnout. And that's really unfortunate, especially when there are circumstances in which changes could have been made. One distinction I want to make here about burnout is it is certainly incumbent upon you as an individual to take care of yourself. That is your responsibility. Nobody can manage your stress and anxiety for you. You have to be able to acknowledge that it exists and recognize and be open to how it may be affecting you and the people around you. So I'll just sort of throw that in there to make sure we remember that moving forward. So what I'm going to do now with those definitions haven't been given and a little bit of explanation, I'm going to go over two different scenarios. It is the same person in both scenarios. At the end, after I read each one to you, a poll's going to come up and you will vote whether you think this scenario is indicative of run-of-the-mill stress, compassion fatigue, or burnout. So let us go to scenario one on the next slide. Scenario one, Amy is an EMS responder. Several of her colleagues and friends have been COVID positive due to work-related exposure. One has passed away from the virus. Amy washes her hands regularly, but she often has to wear the same mask all day. There doesn't seem to be any schedule by which the ambulances are sanitized. There aren't enough staff or volunteers, and she is working a lot of overtime to pick up the slack. She is tired and feels like a zombie, just going through the motions. She feels it's just a matter of time until she too becomes infected, but she thinks maybe then I could get some time off. So Adrenia, if you'll pull up the poll, and let's take a quick vote whether you think that scenario one, Amy, is dealing with stress, compassion fatigue, or burnout. I tried to make these in such a way that I didn't use all the same words that I used in my previous definitions and discussions. So see how it did, see what you think. And after we're done with both of the scenarios and we'll see what you chose, then I will go back and sort of pick through the stressors, the things that mitigated the stress and reactions and stuff like that. Okay, polling is ended. See the results. All right, so there's a no answer. Most of you think it's burnout, and then second is just run-of-the-mill stress, and just 6 of you think it's compassion fatigue. Okay. Very good. All right, so let me go back. And Adriana, you can go to the next slide. I will go over scenario 2. Amy's an EMS responder. Several of her colleagues and friends have been COVID positive due to work-related exposure. One has passed away from the virus. She has fears about her family getting exposed and limits contact with them. She sometimes has nightmares about this and she loses sleep. Her locality has called upon the local MRC to assist, and this has kept Amy's schedule fairly stable with days off. Amy's organization provides enough PPE for work and home. She feels grateful for her days off, and she spends them exercising at home or outside, having virtual chats with family, reading, and catching up with Netflix. All right, so is Amy in scenario 2 experiencing run-of-the-mill stress, compassion fatigue, burnout? So we can bring the poll up. I'll read it one more time in case there are people on the phone that are only on the phone, just in case. Amy is an EMS responder. Several of her colleagues and friends have been COVID positive due to work-related exposure. One has passed away from the virus. She has fears about her family getting exposed and limits contact with them. Amy sometimes has nightmares about this and loses sleep. Her locality has called upon the local MRC to assist with this, and Amy's schedule has been fairly stable and she gets days off. Amy's organization provides enough PPE for work and at home. She feels grateful for her days off and spends them exercising at home or outside, having virtual chats with family, reading and catching up on Netflix. Is it done? Looks like it. All right. Amy is stressed. So it looks like you all feel that the reactions that Amy is showing, that we're learning about, are general reactions to the general COVID hand she has been dealt, so to speak, and that her stress seems to be fairly under control. A couple of you think there's some compassion fatigue there, and don't get me wrong, not to say that it couldn't be. And 2 people think maybe burnout. Now, certainly, so there are not any right or wrong answers to this, because again, we move back and forth on the spectrum, depending on what's going on, the value we place. So to me, it sounds like scenario 1, Amy was experiencing burnout because it indicated hopelessness. And we know that to be at the very end of the spectrum. But here's something else to keep in mind, like I just mentioned. Does she feel that way every day? Does that still mean it's burnout? So that's why I said it's not necessarily a one size fits all. And that we just need to be able to generally acknowledge something's not right and take action. We can go to the next slide. So to wrap this part up, stress, compassion, fatigue, and burnout regarding the stressors that were present in scenario 1, there was a lack of PPE. There was probably fear because of that. And when people have fear, they generally feel angry, and not having a sense of control over your own well-being is certainly stressful, and a lot of people feel that way. The difference is people that are frontline healthcare workers have to continue doing what they're doing despite that. And so certainly that moves people right along. But are there any mitigating factors? And that's the question. Certainly with the onset of COVID and the fears that go along with, and knowing, hey, I signed up for this, I'm prepared to do this, this is what we trained for. But there should be mitigating factors. And coming from a place where you've practiced self-care and you know the things that you need to do to sort of take care of yourself. Because mitigating factors as far as the organization or your job, your team leader, those are things that we're going to talk about when we talk about sort of moving forward. The reactions in scenario 1, Amy, was certainly, the comment about the end about getting it and then maybe having days off. Basically, it sounds like she's feeling pissed off most of the time. She's probably angry. She's at the end of her rope. That's the reaction that we're seeing. And she's not sleeping. And she's exhausted. Now, scenario 2, Amy, the stress of COVID-19 is static, right? These two people are virtually the same, just in two different situations. COVID is static. That doesn't change. But the stressors that she had are very different. And one could say were not as severe as those for Amy 1. Now, that's not to say that Amy 2, despite having all that PPE and knowing when her workplace is cleaned and sanitized and is done very regularly, that's not to say she still doesn't have fears and that it's stressful. Remember, it's still all relative, right? So her reactions was fear. I think everybody's was. And fear about getting her family sick. But she also, it mentioned she looks forward to her days off. I feel like this sounds corny, but having a positive attitude and feeling grateful about the future and feeling hopeful about the future. In disaster behavioral health, there's literature, and I won't get into it too much, but it suggests that one of the ways that determines people's outcomes after a disaster is sort of what their outlook on life was before the disaster. People that were half empty glasses or pessimistic and negative, they probably won't fare as well as the person who is we can get past this, love conquers all. So they also make a difference. Okay, I think we've beat poor Amy to death. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So what do we do? The pandemic, like I said, is pretty much static, right? That's not changing right now. So what I came up with are just 3 really easy steps to remember and to think about doing if you are feeling like maybe you're on the orange dread severity part of that, or if you supervise people, or if you live with somebody that may be in that area. Stop and communicate, reassess, and then move forward. Next slide. So the first step is to stop and communicate. It is maybe the hardest step, but it is the first step. And it can be the hardest step because this is when you actually talk to somebody about what it is that you're experiencing. And since we're talking about the work you've been doing around COVID-19, it would be somebody in your organization. Many times people's pride, organizational cultures make it difficult for people to sort of admit that they are experiencing these things. They can get in the way, but trust your gut instincts. If you feel that you are having stress reactions in your job that really supersede the already existing coping skill sets that you have, it's really important that you have the ability to stop and communicate. Let a team leader or supervisor know that you don't feel as effective as you normally do. This point in sort of the journey to wellness, so to speak, I think is the most pivotal point, because I think it's very difficult for people in helping professions where, especially, in healthcare workers are the heroes of this pandemic, so to speak, right? And it's very difficult to say, but I'm not doing so well, rather than keep going, keep going, keep going. And being able to start this conversation with your supervisor or team leader is the pivotal point. It is at this point, depending on what work is done, what decisions are made, and how the individual is being supported in moving forward, is going to make all the difference in the world. So at this point, there's work that needs to be done, obviously the individual itself, but this is where the organization has the opportunity to have a really safe space where people feel comfortable that they can go to the right people to make changes. Being not anonymous, discretion is also very important. And I totally have heard the stories. I know people that work in these professions. I know that a lot of people will say, that's just not possible where I work. That's just not possible. I know people feel that way. That's why I think that the kind of dialogue that I'm having now is important for supervisors to hear and managers to hear. So hopefully some of you are on here. So this is the really important and pivotal part again. Now, let's talk about what we do once we've stopped. What can we do as individuals, and how can we work with our organization to figure out what's going on and what we need to do? Next slide. So we reassess. Again, a collaborative approach between the organization and the employee or volunteer. Again, while healthcare workers are trained to provide care to people, and while social workers are trained to provide resources to people, give them information, help them with different skill sets, the things that COVID-19 has brought to the table has certainly pushed our boundaries. And so a lot of people have asked, do I really know how to do this? The whole, bedside manner thing has never really been my strong suit as a nurse or, whatever, or fire and EMS. We figure out what's wrong with people and we help them and we send them on their way. Things are different. So a lot of people may feel that they don't have enough training to do their job well. And that in and of itself is hard to admit. that they may be having a difficult time because there are some skill sets that are missing. And some of those skill sets are how to talk to people in a way that's empathic and compassionate. And that's understandable because none of us have been under, this amount of stress in this regard. If people find themselves wanting to avoid certain tasks, like I mentioned, providing support to others, also consider that perhaps the job you were doing, perhaps you were on an assignment that was pretty intense before this even kind of started, so to speak. It may make it more difficult. How much can one person take on realistically? So for the organization, for the leaders, if an employee reports signs of burnout, are there other assignments that can be given? Are there trainings? Can they get time off? Is that something that's feasible? Is there a way to help them improve upon skill sets? So when we reassess, we really take time to understand that we need to somehow adapt to our environment differently. And for frontline workers, it's important that the organization is part of that. When the world is changing around us, we can't refuse to change and then say, what is wrong with everybody? That's just not going to work. I will also just want to point out, next slide, doing a self-care and wellness training is not enough. Hearing the definitions is not enough. It is really good if you encourage your employees to do training such as this. And that is why I said at the beginning, I want to make this relation relatable and operational, hoping that there are things that I say, maybe make a little light bulb go off, maybe make you think of somebody, maybe make you think of yourself, so that it's more than just a training and more than definitions. But even having said that, this is not enough, because moving forward with change, and again, getting to that point where you recognize you as an individual need to acknowledge some of these behaviors and work with your family and be willing to try new things. Because maybe a lot of the things we were doing before that made us feel good, they may not be working. We may not be able to do them anymore. So we'll talk about all that in a second. Revisit your pillars of support. Look at the people in your life that you feel you can have really honest, safe conversations with, that you won't feel judged by. Revisit those. I have a couple of people in my life that, one I used to work with, and we sat right beside each other at work in cubicles. So she knew me, sort of my work style. And every once in a while, I would go to her and say, she did kind of check me on this, because I just had this interaction with somebody and I feel like maybe I came off the wrong way to them, or because the feedback that I got from them seemed really rude or harsh, So again, acknowledging that when you see a problem, when you see somebody sort of responding to you in a way, don't assume it's nothing to do with you, right? Especially if you're not somebody that is really in tune to how they're feeling. So when I have a situation like that, I'll go to somebody that knows me really well and basically ask, was I ever lying? What do you think about that? And, we sort of talk about it. And, but I can't do that with everybody. Some of you may not feel comfortable to say going to your in-laws about these things, or you know who those people are. Take this time, if you're taking a time out, to revisit. those people, those relationships. Like I just mentioned, this pandemic has created challenges for a lot of our go-to things that we enjoy. So we may have to shake things up. I was in the habit of going to the gym or to a yoga studio before this. I haven't gone to either one. I miss it. I wish I could still go, but I have found other ways to get the impact, the outcome that those things gave me, the adrenaline rush, the blood flowing, and then the relaxation afterwards. I found other ways and mechanisms to get that in light of the pandemic. And it may just cause for a shakeup of schedule. Again, we can't expect, that we can do everything the same when the world is changing. And finally, take a breather. Sometimes all you need is a breather. So keep that in mind. So let's talk about moving forward. Next slide. So let's say we've sort of talked to the people we need to talk to. Maybe we've gotten some additional training. Maybe we have a new assignment for a little while. Maybe we've found a way to take some downtime, some time off. Maybe we have a new skill, a new hobby. So let's think about how we can sort of safely or comfortably get back in to work. What does that look like? Slowly integrate back into it, if at all possible. Now, if you have to go back full speed, 100%, everybody's circumstances are different. I would suggest taking what I call the low-hanging fruit first, and excuse me, taking on tasks that are really easy to complete, rather those sort of layered analysis sort of things that you all may have to do. Maybe it's cleaning out your inbox. Maybe it's sending a couple emails that can sort of lay to rest a project you were working on. I find that last email I send to sort of wrap something up and say, okay, we did it, tie in a bow on it, so to speak. They make me feel like I've accomplished something. It doesn't always have to be the low-hanging fruit at work. We are spending a lot of time at home. I myself am 12 months into home ownership. And so I made a sort of DIY around the house and would make a goal of painting a room. I knew I could accomplish it in a day, and it's something I'll be able to look back on and say, oh, I did that, I accomplished that. So make sure that if and whenever possible, you're able to sort of mix things in so it doesn't feel like, you're buried, so to speak, as soon as you get back into the swing of things. And the final thing that I will say about moving forward is remember to celebrate your successes. It is, again, another sort of typical response that people that are in helping professions, obviously, you don't do it for accolades. You don't do it to get rich, so to speak, but really take a moment to recognize that the work that you are doing is very important, and that you may not know it, but something you said to somebody, an act of kindness and compassion, something you said to a family member, you may not even remember it because life has been crazy, but I am willing to bet there are people that you have come into contact with who were comforted by you, and they will never forget you. And I know that we don't even need to know when that happens. We hope that that happens, but take a moment and just really grasp that it probably does happen. And that's amazing. That's amazing. And so celebrate yourself, celebrate your colleagues. It's important. It's really important that you do that. Next slide. So let's talk about some new self-care coping strategies. We have another poll. I have listed all kinds of self-care and events and things that you can do. Adridia will bring the poll up, and then just take a second and check all that applied. You know, maybe things that you've already been doing, maybe things that you're curious to do, you're interested in trying. So you can check all that apply there. Back so I can see it. There are a couple I put in there just for comic relief. Hopefully you're paying attention. Like I mentioned, I have things that I, sort of do on a daily basis that in light of the pandemic, I had to step up. I have a regular, well, actually, I will say it was not regular, but I have tried to meditate, and I would try to do it maybe a few times a week. And that is something that I've actually invested in an app, and I made an intentional effort to do it at least twice a day. I don't do it twice a day anymore because I don't feel that the need is there, but it's something that I had to change and make time for. Okay, polling is ended. If by chance there are people that are only on the phone, the options here are exercise, meditation, talking to a therapist, talking to a peer, arts and crafts, having another glass of wine, getting a head start. I can't see all of it now, but getting a head start on Virginia's plan to legalize marijuana. Nobody voted for that one. Walking the dog, virtual groups with family and friends, DIY projects, praying, journaling, going outside for a walk, or no answer. And it looks like, let's see, 15. Exercise is generally the most common, but DIY. I've had to get a couple of things done around the house. Living and being here more, certainly appliances and things, you use them more. And I know some people have actually started some renovation, and there is a waiting list to get people to come out to your house to do stuff. I mean, everybody is just sort of investing in their homes a little bit more than they did before. Okay, very good. Let's go back. All right, next slide. So a couple of discussion points about some of the options that I gave you. And if in a lot of the studies that have come out over the past, certainly over the summer, it does help to stay away from media, from TV and news and social media. You'll be surprised just one day, and the next day when you start your day and sort of dig in, how kind of lighter you feel. So that's helpful. Try to stay engaged with your support networks. exercise, to change the way we exercise, like I mentioned. Certainly the industry is taking advantage. I don't even know how much that the mirror cost. I've been meaning to Google it just out of curiosity. But yeah, that industry is definitely stepping up their game. Talk to your physician. Like I mentioned earlier, if some of the symptoms that may be manifesting that you may just think are just real general sort of health medical issues, and simply that, it really could be stress. And I will say, as far as medication, some people need to use medication. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. A lot of people that suffer with depression and anxiety feel that the best sort of way to assist with that is a mix of medication and some form of self-care, coping mechanism, mindfulness, things like that. Speaking of mindfulness, try to be in the moment. In the sheet, you're going to get an information sheet after this is over. In here is a link to, I found a really simple YouTube video that will take you through 5 minutes of mindfulness. It's based in a breathing meditation. Mindfulness is not just about breathing. There are ways you can do it where there's imagery. A lot of people consider praying kind of a form of mindfulness, like really thinking about scripture, choosing one, and just sort of mulling it over and trying to really focus on that. Grounding exercises are great. Grounding exercises in disaster behavioral health. This is when we are providing services to other people. And if somebody is hyperventilating, telling them to just breathe and slow down may not be helpful. Like I was saying, I had felt like I kind of couldn't catch my breath. I actually got angry that I couldn't even breathe in deep enough to start like a breathing meditation. And so grounding technique is when you actually just sort of point out 5 different senses, 5 different things that you can see, that you can hear, that you can smell, that you can taste, and just really taking a couple seconds to just use your senses and nothing else. This really, really is helpful for people in the direct aftermath of the disaster as well. There is a link to a YouTube video for that in the sheet you'll be getting later. Next slide. Here are a couple of resources. I can't believe I talked this long. It's already 1:15. So I will go through these briefly. These will all be available to you as well. FrontlineWellnessVA.org is simply a website that was developed by subject matter experts in Virginia in nursing, dentists. We had a pastor. We had folks that work in human resources, health department, from all over the field as part of the governor's healthcare coalition. This was a subgroup for frontline healthcare workers. And we put together this website that's really kind of cool and interactive. There's something there for everybody, for behavioral health professionals, or healthcare professionals, for administrative HR folks, where you can find other trainings, things that may be helpful for your staff. VA Coats is what stressed me out all summer. This is the thing I've been referring to, but it all came out very well. I'm very proud of it. This is a warm line that is available to help anybody sort of cope with all of the stress and isolation and fear and anger and lack of resources due to the pandemic. That information is there. I would be remiss as a DBHDS employee not to give you a link to all of the community service boards in Virginia. They all have 24-hour phone number that they answer. I know because I checked them all. So that's available. TrueCareLife.com is a really kind of cool app that works as a journal. So both first responders and healthcare organizations in your area participate. It's anonymous. and you kind of put in every day, maybe how you're feeling, what you experienced, and the app sort of gets to know you and it generates suggestions for places that and things that you may find helpful. On the flip side of that, healthcare professionals and administrators and planners can sort of see if there's areas that frontline workers or first responders are having more difficulty in finding a lack of resources, but again, it is anonymous. But it's essentially just data. Stress first aid. Oh, I gotta go back one. The next one is simply our DBHDS. Everybody's had a COVID-19 banner. This is ours. It's applicable. There's stuff on there for disaster responders, for healthcare workers, a lot of our licensed behavioral health professionals as well, and the general public. Stress first aid is I mentioned earlier, is a training model that's available online and it's free. That really helps people identify and feel comfortable and kind of guide people along, maybe how to navigate when they are seeing some changes in a peer or a colleague that brings about concerns. Like I talked about, if it's been several months after disaster sort of wrapped up and it's done, and you as an administrator, supervisor, colleague, peer, friend, still see some people struggling, this will be really helpful in helping you plan and design and implement some sort of policy or practice that can be helpful for that. Sort of conversely, psychological first aid, also online, also free, could be helpful if you are having some difficulty providing that sort of extra support to patients or the clients that you serve, the general public. Like I mentioned, many of you were trained to provide support in probably limited capacities, maybe, but this sort of goes into a little bit more. It is geared more towards a shorter and greater, necessarily greater, but a shorter impact disaster. So one thing to keep in mind is you may hear things in that really may not apply to COVID because this is a longer term, and those responses that we see directly after a disaster aren't necessarily prevalent in long-term recovery here. The next one is something I came across this week. It is Skills for Psychological Recovery. It's a supervisor orientation. The link to that, it's online, it's free, it's an hour, and it's on December 15th. So I thought that was timely. I would include it. Apps such as Breathe, Headspace, and also just on YouTube. If you're interested in learning more about mindfulness or just want to listen to something that's very relaxing, I encourage you to do so. I did. I actually invested in one for a year subscription because I knew I was going to use it quite often. And finally, the Virginia Community Response Network. This is, I've worked with this group before, and they've actually worked with first responders and frontline workers in the aftermath of the Virginia Beach shooting and Charlottesville, the civil unrest in Charlottesville, and I think a couple other things. But these are licensed providers and they specialize in trauma. And they have a few different platforms by which they can talk to people. It is anonymous, and I think they even offer groups, but this is the link to their website. They're still operating, and they're a great group to work with. Next slide.